Meow. Meow. Boo, 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 boo. Professor Layton and the miracle mask. Hey guys, what the fuck is up, you guys? My name is emandan642, and welcome to Professor Layton and the Miracle Mask.
Hey fucker, making another shitty review.
Oh shit. I guess it's that time. Well, I needed to add another character into the videos for skits, so here is Rotobrag. He is my roommate, I guess. I mean, this is the same fucker who was in the Halloween video. Somehow he broke out of my basement. I guess I'll make the locks tighter next time. I guess he'll appear in videos from now on. This has nothing to do with lore. This is non-canon, unless I say otherwise. I will be making lore. Eventually. I promise.
Motherfucker, no you won't. You made that new decade, new E-Man video in January, and it took 7 months for you to actually commit to making videos. And you already introduced me in the fucking last video.
I did? Wait, who are you again? Alright, I think it's time for you to leave. He's got a point. As I said before, I played Professor Layton when I was a dumb child. And since these are puzzle games that take brain power, I didn't finish most of the games on the first try, except for Unknown Future and Last Spectre. Curious Village and Diabolical Box I finished later in time, but for some reason I never finished Miracle Mask. That was until I replayed the whole game earlier this year. This game was the first Layton game on the 3DS. No more are the 2D portraits in the areas that I am quite fond of. Now everything is in 3D. The character models are a bit off. They don't look terrible, but they aren't really amazing. There are definitely much better 3D models in other games on the 3DS. But I do think all the environments and places look great. We still have the same beautiful cutscenes from before, but they look even better. And there are more of them. There's also these kind of cutscenes which use 3D models with voice acting, but not the text box scenes. I don't know why we have those cutscenes with the actual 2D cutscenes, but they're nice to have. With the new hardware comes a lot of new features. Each area is much more fleshed out than the 2DS pictures. In Last Spectre, you could interact more with the environment, and you could do much more of that in this game. One thing to note about the story is that the prequel trilogy that it is in has a lot more of a stretched storyline that spans the 3 games. Each game has its own story, but there are much more threads piecing them together than just a few characters, like the original trilogy. Layton receives a letter from his childhood friend Angela Lador. The city of Montador is being attacked by a man with a mysterious mask, known as the Mask of Chaos. This man's identity is a mystery. He seems to have some mysterious powers and can fly. The first night that Layton arrives, there is a carnival, and the masked gentleman, as he is called, turns a bunch of people into stone and causes chaos. Emmy appears out of the blue with a fucking horse, and the gang chases the masked gentleman down on horses in this little minigame thing. This is kind of fun and all, but it's weird how like 10 minutes into the game, you have this horse riding game that is decently fun and all, but you never do it again. You can play an actual minigame that is basically the same thing to this, but you don't have to. So they catch up to the gentleman and he disappears, leaving only his cape behind. The story is kind of similar to Last Spectre in the way that this gentleman is attacking the city in the same way the Spectre is, but this story is just much better. First off, I really like how this game connects to Layton's past much more than any of the previous games. I loved how Unknown Future involved people and events from Layton's past, but this game has more of that. The only issue I'd say is that it doesn't entirely fit in with the events of the original trilogy. I guess I'll get into that later. The previous games being on DS had limitations. Now on the 3DS, the hardware is much better, so the puzzles are much more involved, if you could say. There is a added depth to immerse yourself with the puzzles. I would definitely say this is the best the puzzles have ever been. Plus there is a shit ton more to do. And more daily puzzles, which are also very fun. There are so many fucking puzzles, and I am not complaining. Maybe it was just me taking my good old time with this game, but it took me 40 fucking hours to complete. Maybe it was because I completed every puzzle and got every hint coin and completed the game to 100%, but I did the same with the previous games when I replayed them, aside from getting all the hint coins, and those games I've beaten like 5 to 7 hours. Sure, I was speedrunning those games, and this game I was finishing for the first time, but 40 hours is a long time for a Layton game. I didn't feel like it was 40 hours, it felt not that long, which is a good thing. I mean, the game is very enjoyable, so it wasn't a drag. So Layton, Luke, and Emmy make it to the Lador Manor. There, we meet Angela and Henry Lador. Angela I remember from the first time playing the game, but for some reason I did not remember Henry at all. He was not a forgettable character at all. Now that I replay the game, I actually like his character quite a bit. But most of the good character stuff comes from after the point that I stopped playing originally. So back during their teenage years, Layton, Angela, Henry, and their friend Randall and their other friend Alphonse, who I'll talk about when he's important, were all good friends back in the day. They were all around 17 and lived in the small town of Stansbury. Layton and Henry discovered the mask that the masked gentleman is currently wearing, but Randall died in an accident shortly after. Henry found the mask and searched for Randall, and it was displayed in his house up until a few months before the start of the game, which coincided with the first appearance of the masked gentleman. The sudden appearance of all these characters who are this important to Layton's past is really weird and off. Layton's not the type of person to openly share his past, but this is quite important and we have never heard of anything about these characters before. That's a problem with prequels. It can mess with the original story unless it was planned before, which it was clearly not in this case. After that, we get a flashback to Layton and Randall in Stansbury 18 years ago when they were 17 years old. I really like these parts. They probably totally amount to about 30% of the game, which is what makes this game longer. We then have the current story going on, plus we get to see what happens 18 years ago. It's really cool. I thought it was cool to see prequel Layton in Last Spectre and all the cutscenes in Unknown Future from years before, but here we get to go way back to when Layton was 17 years old. We see his parents, we see where he grew up, and wait, what? He only spent 3 years here. Layton only lived in Stansbury from when he was 14 to 17. Well, alright, let's see how these parts play out. I really like the flashback parts. It's cool to see this lively city compared to this small town. And speaking of lively city, Montador is massive. I mean, yes, there are more areas to explore in this city, but I mean in scope. It just feels large. London from Unknown Future is obviously a very large place. It's London, but it never felt like this massive place that Montador feels like. Part of that is due to the hardware limitations on the DS, and part of that is due to London not really aiming to be this large place. It is, definitely, but Montador's main point is that it is this massive city. In every area we go to, we see flashing lights and colors and people everywhere. I love how we see people in the background. It really adds to the depth of a place. But it can be annoying to figure out who you can and cannot talk to. Back in the present, the three go back to the Lador Manor. Henry suddenly leaves after they arrive, quite suspiciously. They search around the manor and come to the conclusion that the only person who could have the motive for stealing the mask would have been Alphonse Dalston, who has a bit of a feud with Henry over power because they both played a major part in building the city. The gang heads over to Alphonse's house. Alphonse denies everything. He says the masked gentleman's destruction is bad for his business, which makes sense, and blames Henry and Angela for everything. I do like the tension behind these characters. It's sad to see this group of what used to be friends torn apart due to what happened 18 years ago. Alphonse says that Henry made Randall go in the ruins so he could have the treasure and Angela for himself. There is a lot going on between these characters, but it doesn't feel overwhelming though. We don't know enough about these characters to really say anything for sure yet. Alphonse's butler finds a letter written by the masked gentleman forewarning his next miracle. That night, at the city plaza, everyone is gathered and the gentleman appears. He is walking on air, holy shit. Instead of turning people into stone, this time he makes people float away and vanish. The gentleman reveals the existence of a mask of order, which is a counterpart for the mask of chaos that the gentleman has. The gentleman vanishes and the police show up to the scene to arrest Alphonse because he is suspected of stealing the mask and being behind all the miracles. Alphonse blames Henry for setting him up and trying to ruin everyone's lives for his own personal goal. I mean, can you blame Alphonse for this? The whole game, Henry had this weird, suspicious vibe to him. He seems to have set up Alphonse, even though it would make no sense for him to destroy the city that he worked so hard to build. Back in the past, Layton and Randall decide to search for the Mask of Order. Angela doesn't want Randall to go at first, but he convinces her that he will be safe. They leave and explore the Azran ruins. For some reason, there is a desert in England, but okay. This part is really cool. Here you get to control Layton and Randall in the ruins as you solve maze-like puzzles where you push boulders to make pathways or avoid enemies. Now I'm getting into spoilers, so play the fucking game. They get to the bottom of the ruins where we see the scene where Randall dies. We already know he dies, but here we see how he dies. The ruins are collapsing and Randall falls to his death, choosing to hold onto the mask instead of dropping it. The suspense that is building up through the entire flashback sections, knowing that this would happen, is really tense. Near the end, you are really on the edge of your seat. Randall is by no means a perfect character, but his death hurts. He had a passion. He tried to solve the mystery of the Azran and the ruins of Akbadine, but he dies. Layton finds the Azran treasure in honor of Randall, and it's just gold. It's just money. Money is great and all, but Randall died in search of this. We see Layton clearly saddened. He breaks the news to Angela and Henry. Angela breaks down crying, and Henry is just there in shock. Not sad per se, but in shock. This clearly takes a toll on Layton, but it's nothing like the ending to Unwanted Future did. I wish we saw him more taken back how he witnessed his friend die, but then it would kind of undermine the moment from Unwanted Future. Layton then decides to leave Stansbury because of the recent events. Back in the present, the next day they search for the gentleman and suspect him to be in the Reunion Inn, the only place they haven't explored yet. While exploring the inn, Morty, the inn's manager, gives Layton a letter addressed to him by the gentleman. After reading the letter, the lights shut off. They search the rest of the inn for the gentleman. As it turns out, Bloom, one of the police chiefs, is actually working for this mysterious old man who is searching for the mask. He mentions the Garden of Healing, which is the Golden Garden from Last Spectre, and the City of Harmony, which is a new place that is not in either of these games. Like I said before, the prequel trilogy has a lot more of an ongoing story, so a lot of things in this game especially carry over to Azran Legacy. I mean, the game is called Azran Legacy, and the Azran race is very important in this game. But I really like this foreshadowing of the next game. Meanwhile, Layton and the gang are still searching and come across this movie theater. A short movie plays detailing the story of a happy king and queen. One day, the king left to slay a dragon but did not return. The queen betrayed the king and married the chancellor, who took the king's crown and kingdom. I wonder what this could mean. When the movie is over, the masked gentleman appears and he kidnapped Luke. Layton saves Luke, and the masked gentleman reveals himself to be Randall Ascot. Randall never died in the ruins. He fell in a ravine and was saved by a small village. He had lost all of his memories from his life as Randall and lived there for years, until he started receiving letters from someone detailing his past life. Those letters led him to getting the mask and becoming the masked gentleman. Those letters gave the idea that Henry was responsible for Randall losing everything. Hence, the movie about the king. I saw this coming. I bet everyone saw this coming. It was pretty obvious. It was kind of the point to be obvious, but still. Who else could it have been besides Randall? For Randall's last miracle, he will destroy Montador by burying it in sand, because it's in the middle of a fucking desert in England. Layton solves the last Azran miracle, bless you, being the mask of chaos and the mask of order were the same mask all along, just two different pieces making up the whole thing. Once the chaos is over, Layton reveals everything. He reveals that Henry never betrayed Randall, that Randall was manipulated by the person who wrote the letters, who was none other than Desclay, who disguised himself as Angela this whole time. Well, not the first time that Layton met Angela in the game. That was the real Angela. The real Angela was trapped in a room in the Reunion Inn. Desclay says that he already won, then dips. Alright. I don't know why he doesn't really do anything in this game. It's a bit disappointing, but he's still a really cool character, and I really cannot wait to see more of him. Layton reveals that Montador was built for Randall's return, and Angela reveals that her marriage to Randall was a fake, and that she was waiting for Randall's return the whole time, and that Henry was protecting everything for Randall's return, and that Montador and Henry's fortune was all along written to Randall. The game ends pretty nicely with this happy ending for all the characters. I don't really like how the whole game Henry comes across as the snake, and how at the end he turns out he cherished his friendship with Randall the whole time, and the main characters of the story was Randall and Henry. They were the best friends, not Randall and Herschel. But in all honesty, it was a nice story, and I really liked the characters and the ending, even though it was pretty predictable. After the credits, we get this scene where Desclay uncovers the infinite vault of Akbadine. What that is, I have no fucking idea. Then the old man who was with Bloom in the Reunion Inn shows up and takes control of it. The scene really fucking hypes you up for the next game. This game is definitely an improvement from Last Spectre. It's not a major improvement, but it is one. The story is not amazing, but I liked the characters and their motivations. The ending was pretty predictable, and some of the Azran and Akbadine stuff kind of felt like build-up for Azran Legacy. But besides that, the story was good. I'm going to give Professor Layton and the Miracle Mask an 8 out of 10. Besides the puzzles, which I thought were probably the best out of the entire series so far. Don't fucking chew on that, huh? Everything else was pretty good. Better than Last Spectre, but not as good as Diabolical Box or Unknown Future. This has been Professor Layton and the Miracle Mask. Fuck you.
Why, yes. Thank you, Henry.